Okay, so taxonomy. We talked last time about taxonomy and how that it's putting things into groups, classification essentially. And that when it first started out, things were grouped based on what? How they look. Yeah, morphology, how they look. But today, that's not what it's based on at all. It's based on what's called phylogenetics, which is evolutionary and genetic relationships. We talked about how that they decided who's related to who. The main way is by sequencing the DNA and comparing the orders of A's and B's and P's and C's. And the more alike those are, the more related things are, and the more likely they are to share more groups, more clades. They also might look at the order of amino acids in a protein. And again, the more amino acids that are the same, the more they share groups. But our classification groups are called clades. And the biggest and most inclusive one is the domain. There's 3 domains, eukarya. Anybody remember the others? Eubacteria and archaea. There's, depending on what textbook you look at, anywhere from 4 to 7, sometimes maybe even 8 kingdoms. I usually am going to teach you the 6 kingdom approach. Yeah. Well, not usually 8, but sometimes the protist group gets broken into lots of different things. It's some protist group, which I can't tell you the name of off the top of my head. There's a lot of debate, especially about the things we used to call protists, because what are they finding out about them as they study them more? They're not related to each other. They're really all different things. So that's why the kingdom number is weird. And then we talked about everything from phylum on down through species. We classified ourselves into these groups. Let's remind ourselves about our groupings. We are eukaryotes, because we have a membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. We're obviously animals. We are in phylum Chordata, which includes all the vertebrate animals. We're in the mammal class, because we breastfeed our young, warm-blooded, have fur and such. We are primates. Other than the genetics that we share with other primates, we share an opposable thumb, 3D vision. Hominids were basically originally grouped because they could do what? Stand upright. And then the genus is Homo. We are the only remaining species in that group. And sapiens is the species. Remember that a scientific name is always written genus first, in first letter capitalized, species next, in lowercase. And if you're handwriting it, you underline it. And if you're copying it, you're supposed to do what? Italicize. All right, and then we looked at phylogenetic trees. We talked about this is sort of an evolutionary family tree. What's implied to be at the very bottom of that tree? The first thing, whatever it was, the first living thing. And then at every V, like here and here, for example, what's implied to be in those places? Common ancestors. So this whatever was here was the common ancestor of bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Whatever was right here, on the other hand, was only a common ancestor for archaea and eukarya. And that's one of the reasons archaea has been branched off and grouped separately than archaea, or eubacteria rather, because they think they're more closely related to eukaryotes than they are to bacteria. A couple of other things to remember. The further back and toward the left something is, what does that typically mean? The older, in terms of evolution. The more close 2 branches are on a tree, that tells you what? The more closely related they are. So you'll see phylogenetic trees alike. You might occasionally also see them called cladograms. I don't know if that's a word I used last time. Because what's a clade? A group. So it's like a graph of groups is essentially what cladogram means. Graph of groups. All All right, we just barely started talking about viruses last time. Let's try to hit them pretty hard today. Remember that viruses are considered not to be alive. They're not considered to be alive. Let's put it that way. Because they're not made of what? What do they not have that living things are supposed to have? Again. And well, some of them have DNA, some of them don't. They don't have cells. They don't have metabolism on their own. Don't really maintain homeostasis. So a lot of those things that we talked about that were characteristics of living things, they don't do. Now, they do some of them. They do have inheritance patterns. They can reproduce. But there are several of those things they can't do. The word virus means poison. Thought they might be like track shoes. We define viruses as obligate intracellular parasites. Essentially meaning that they have to be inside a cell. Otherwise, what are viruses doing if they're not in a cell? They're just sort of floating around, sitting around, doing absolutely nothing. But once they get inside a cell, they do some serious stuff, right? Once they get in there, they become parasites. They benefit at the expense of the host. We talked last time about the most simple viruses. And we call them bacteriophages. And literally, what does that word mean? Bacteria eaters. And we look at a picture of what a bacteriophage might look like. So it's something like that. Where everything in blue is protein. We call that protein coat around the virus the capsid. And then pretty much the rest of it is the genetic information inside. And remember that with viruses, it's either DNA or RNA, not both. Our cells have both. The viruses either are DNA viruses or they're RNA viruses. And which of those two is going to be the most stable and least mutating? The DNA, for sure. All right, so we also talked about retroviruses the last time a little bit. And we said retroviruses are called retro because why? They're RNA viruses. And what do scientists think about RNA? Came first, but the issue with it is what? Yeah, it mutates all the time. For a virus, that's not always a bad gig, because what does that mean about immune systems in that virus?
It's hard to stop it.
It's hard to stop it, because it's always mutating, and every time it mutates, your immune system's essentially got to start over in the fight against it. So that can make them kind of dangerous. It can make them kind of hard to control. Yeah, the flu. What were some other ones that we mentioned? HIV, Ebola, common cold. Those are all examples of retroviruses. We talked about how they're an exception to the central dogma. Remember, the central dogma is the whole genetic starts with DNA. That DNA is then used as sort of a template for building what? mRNA. That process, DNA to mRNA, is what process? Transcription. The RNA then leaves the nucleus and it goes out to where? Well, it's going to make proteins, but what actually makes the proteins? The ribosomes are kind of like the carpenters of your body, right? They put together your proteins. And that process where the ribosomes use the directions in the mRNA to build the protein, that is translation. And then those proteins go on to determine pretty much everything about you. We'll say they determine your traits. Put in a little loop there to represent what? Replication, which should happen before every what? Cell division, mitosis, meiosis, and such. Now, what we said is the retroviruses, they can't do this, right? Every living thing that we know of does genetics this way. But retroviruses can't because they don't have what? They don't have DNA. So they have to insert RNA into a host cell. What do they insert with that RNA? Yeah, that enzyme, maybe some others, but that one for sure. And that enzyme is going to take their RNA and do the reverse of transcription, which means instead of turning DNA into RNA, it's going to use RNA to make DNA. That DNA then gets embedded into host DNA. So this is reverse transcription. And during that process of reverse transcription, that's where a lot of the mutations will happen. And that's one of the reasons those viruses are so hard to control, stop. Again, make sure you know some examples. Common cold, the influenza virus, flu virus, HIV, Ebola, or just a few. The other thing that we just started talking about a little bit was the lytic cycle. And we said the lytic cycle was the life cycle of a virus. And it's how they reproduce. And if you look at it up here on the screen, there's 5 steps, usually is how it's broken down, for how the lytic cycle works. Just a second, I'm checking a date on something here. All right, so the first step is when the virus attaches up to a receptor. Now, is the receptor it's attaching to, is that a receptor for a virus? Would it make sense for you to have receptors for viruses? No, it's probably attaching to a receptor for something else that it's just evolved to use. Once it's attached, its protein coat is going to act sort of like a syringe, and it's going to inject its genetic information into your cells. Once that genetic information goes in, because that's called penetration, can your cell tell the difference between the virus's DNA and your own? It can't. And your cells basically do whatever the DNA tells them to do. Well, what does virus DNA tell them to do? Make more viruses. So it starts step 3, which is biosynthesis. It starts making the pieces of a virus. Step 4, maturation, where it actually starts putting the virus pieces together. And then eventually it's going to have made so many hundreds and thousands of viruses that they're just going to burst out of the cell. And that's why this is called what? That's why the whole cycle is called what? Lytic. Because what does lit or lyse mean? Cut, tear, break, split, destroy. And that's how viruses make you sick. And the scary part is, thousands, hundreds of thousands maybe of viruses may burst out of this one cell, all of which are looking for what? Another cell to do that to. So that's kind of scary. Just one second, trying to find this date. All right, now that's the way most viruses work, the lytic cycle. It's their normal life cycle. There are some viruses, though, that can sort of take a time out from the lytic cycle. And they can enter what's called the lysogenic cycle. And this is kind of scary, too. Their DNA, which we're showing here down here in I guess in red, this is in a bacteria. So the blue loop is the bacterial chromosome. The red loop is the virus DNA. And notice they've joined together. When the virus DNA becomes part of your, or in this case the bacteria's chromosome, it's called the prophage, which means what? Prophage. Before what's about to happen. I want to say phage a minute ago. In bacteriophage.
Oh.
Before the eating.
Oh, okay.
So essentially this is a timeout before it's going to destroy the cells, essentially is what's going on. And that DNA is just sort of sitting there. If this was you and this was going on in you, would you have any symptoms at this point? Nope. It's there. It's waiting. What's it waiting for? Yeah, maybe something weird to go on with your immune system. Maybe you're really stressed out. Stress lowers your immune system capabilities. Maybe you've got some other disease. Maybe you've got HIV. Maybe you've got hepatitis. Something. Maybe you've got something like Lyme disease. Some kind of weird disease that's really putting a lot of pressure on your immune system. And when your immune system drops, then this virus goes from lysogenic and enters back into what? Lytic. And you get symptoms. What's maybe the most famous human virus that does this kind of thing? Chickenpox virus. You get chickenpox as a kid, you get a little rash, it itches, you feel bad for a couple of days, you get over it. But what might happen when you're 50 or 60 or 70? It comes back as shingles, which is a lot worse usually, right? This huge rash along your back, feels like your bones are breaking, feels like your vertebrae are crushing. It can be really, really serious. It's the same virus. You had it the whole time. It never went away. It was just sort of hiding, waiting to come out. A lot of times people who get shingles find out what after they've been to the doctor for the shingles? Find out something else is going on. Maybe they have cancer. Maybe they got something else that's weakened their immune system. And that's why the shingles happened to flare up when it did. Because there was something else going on. Yeah?
Shingles contagious, but you rubbing your rash in someone else?
Yeah, I mean, you could contact something that they contacted. And if you never had chickenpox, you could get chickenpox from somebody who had shingles. So yeah, it is contagious.
Just some random guy who scratched his back rash and then touched something and then you go over there. Like
You could pick it up. Yep, it happens. So, yeah, let's talk about some examples of some viral diseases out there. There are lots and lots of them. So I got some famous ones up here on the board. Smallpox. It's one of the biggest killers in human history, right? Smallpox. What do we know about smallpox today? It is non-existent. As far as we know, smallpox as a virus on Earth is extinct, except in two places. What are those two places? Atlanta, Georgia, and Moscow, Russia. Why Atlanta, Georgia? That's the Centers for Disease Control. And Moscow has a similar place. Why did it go extinct? The first vaccination that we ever had was against smallpox. And a guy named Edward Jenner did something that today probably would have got him locked up, but ended up saving millions and millions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, some people started to notice that these women who milked cows, they called them milkmaids, didn't seem to get smallpox. But they did seem to get a much more mild version with some similar symptoms called cowpox. They got a couple big bumps and some fever, but then they were okay. So Jenner guessed that the two viruses, the virus that caused smallpox and the virus that caused cowpox, were really related. So it was just a guess because he didn't know at the time. Anybody have an idea when he was around? Late 1700s, early 1800s. That's Jenner. So we're talking over 200 years ago. He takes a guess. Doesn't have an electron microscope to look at the viruses or anything. It's just a straight up guess. But they didn't even know what DNA was at that point in time, right? When did we figure out what DNA was? Yeah, 1950, like 1953 or something. So we're talking way after all that. Takes a guess, and he says, okay, these women get cowpox, they don't get chickenpox. So I'm going to find a woman with cowpox. And I'm going to take a needle, a syringe, and I'm going to stick some of her sores, and I'm going to suck out some of the fluid. It's going to have viruses in it. And I have a baby that's a few months old. I'm going to inject it with cowpox. He did. Baby got cowpox, got a few bumps. It was okay. Then he said, okay, now I'm sure I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to find somebody with smallpox. I'm going to suck out some of the fluid from their sores. I'm going to inject it into my baby. Because I think,
This is his child.
this is his own child. He said, I think that once you get over cowpox, the two viruses are close enough alike that your immunity to the cowpox will also prevent you from getting smallpox. But he's guessing. Turns out he guessed right. And that same vaccine we eventually vaccinated as many people as we could over the world. Smallpox virus can only live where? In people. So once just about everybody was vaccinated, what happened? It went extinct. But being the forward-thinking people we are, we kept some of it. And so did the Russians. Probably with what intention? To make a biological weapon out of it, more than likely. And it's kind of scary today. And after 9/11, people kind of got really scared about that because here's the thing. Your parents have been vaccinated against smallpox. You haven't. When they stopped giving it to people on a regular basis. Before that. I was born in 71 and I've never been vaccinated. My parents have been vaccinated. Yeah, some of your parents are probably my age, so they may not have been, but somewhere mid to late 60s, I think they stopped giving it regularly for people. Not unless you were like going to places that had an outbreak, like in the 70s. No. So here's the thing: they got worried after 9/11 that somehow let me back up a minute. Russian scientists back during the Cold War were like highly valued people, right? Then the Soviet Union went broke. And what happened to those scientists who'd been like heroes? A lot of them lost their jobs, they went broke, but they still had access to nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, smallpox, and all these other things that they're working on. So a lot of people got really nervous that these people who didn't have any money anymore might just decide to sell what they knew and sell what they had. And then, some terrorists got some hands on some smallpox virus. It doesn't take a lot to spread it, right? I mean, how did Europeans kill Indians with it?
Blankets.
Yeah, they took blankets from sick people and intentionally gave them to Indians to spread it. It's not that hard to spread. So it's scary. And so after 9/11, our government made hundreds of thousands of smallpox vaccinations. And they're in a containment unit somewhere waiting if we ever need them. They're there, along with vaccinations for some other diseases as well. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if was there like a funny story Edward Jenner told to his kid?
Oh, I don't know. Like I said, if Jenner had done today what he did then, he would be in jail, right?
I wonder what the kid's reaction to that would be later on in life. Wondering.
Yeah, you never. I mean, like the guy from Minnesota Vikings, Adrian Peterson. You guys been following that story? He got arrested for like whipping his kid with a switch. Compare that to what Edward Jenner did. I don't think they compare very well. Yeah.
If you get a vaccination after you get sick, does it help at all?
It might help you get over it a little bit faster, but it's not going to help a whole lot. Not going to help much. So that's smallpox. Polio, that vaccination's been around for what, 50 or 60 years? Therefore, those two viruses must be what kind of viruses? DNA. Remember, DNA doesn't mutate much. It's steady and stable. Yeah.
Was there a smallpox outbreak when, in the 80s in Germany, right? So, some people got
I don't think that would have been. I think the last known case of smallpox in the world, I think, was in Somalia in the late 70s. So I'm not sure what would have been going on in Germany, but it wasn't smallpox.
I had my baby sister, she had her shots a month or two back, and they were talking about the polio vaccine and whatnot, and they changed it around the early 2000s. Before it was a liquid, and they changed it because liquid, you had a small chance of still getting polio.
Right. They've been through several different versions of it, but essentially it's a very similar thing. The way they give it to you is somewhat different. It's essentially the same vaccine. Slightly different. They're similar. Some other virus diseases: HIV, AIDS, influenza, chickenpox, the common cold, Ebola. For most of those, if you go to the doctor and he figures out you've got a virus, what's the usual course of action that the doctor's going to take? No. Well, just not Ebola. General virus. We're not talking HIV or Ebola here. General virus infection. He's going to say, go home. There's not much I can do for you. Drink some fluids. Rest. Stay away from other people. Good luck.
Really?
Yeah. Antibiotics don't help against viruses. Antibiotics kill what? Bacteria. Now, they are developing antiviral drugs, like Tamiflu, right? You guys have heard of Tamiflu. That's an antiviral. The drugs that people like Magic Johnson are taking right now to fight HIV, those are antivirals. But they're still somewhat experimental. They're very expensive. And if you just have the common cold, they're not going to give you that. If you have a stomach virus, they're not going to give you that. Now, if you came down with Ebola, they might give it a try. Hopefully that's not going to happen.
People recovering.
And they've got some, and that's one. I'm not going to go too far into this because it's one of the things you got to do in your book report, is to talk about how they're treating these people. So I'm not going to tell you the answers to that. So again, now,
Did y'all not tell them the whole story in the class?
about which one?
Ebola.
What about?
About the people who had it.
Oh yeah, we talked about it. Yeah. So the hot zone thing, that's part of the report, is for you to read how they treat it and all that kind of stuff. So
Oh, so it says in there how they treat it.
no, not in hot. No, you got to read.
But there.
You got to research and tie it into current events.
There are people
At first I said
because
current.
they recovering from.
Yes, they brought them back from Africa to
And
treat
they're
them.
getting better.
Yeah. There have been several people who've lived through it. They're starting to figure it out slowly but surely. Moving on down. So but basically for right now, the treatment of viral diseases right now is not much. Good luck. That's essentially treatment for most virus diseases.
Common cold and chickenpox.
Yeah.
Probably.
Right. Now they might treat the symptoms. They might give you, Advil for the pain. They might give you something for other symptoms. But typically they're not treating the cause of the infection. Hard to treat. A couple of other things that you just ought to recognize terms for. There are these little virus-like particles called viroids. Literally, what does that word mean, viroid? You put OID on the end of the word, what does it mean? Like. So it means like a virus. Like a virus. That's what viroid means. It's like a virus. But unlike a virus, it's only made of a little piece of RNA. There's no protein coat. There's nothing else. It's just a piece of RNA. Now, luckily for us, these don't affect us because what knocks them off in us real fast? If you were to get a viroid inside your body, what would happen? Your immune system would get it. There's no protective coat. It would kill it very quickly. But they do affect plants. Plants can get lots of diseases. Plants can get fungal diseases. Plants can get bacterial diseases. Plants can get viral diseases, just like you do. And they don't have the same kind of immune response that we have. So they're probably more susceptible than we are. Not from a viroid, no. Our immune system will knock that off.
From like.
Now, this next thing to me is even more scary than Ebola. These little things called prions. And they're just pieces of proteins that are infectious. No DNA, no RNA. Just self-replicating proteins. And notice what it says here. They cause degenerative disorders of the nervous system. Such as what? What's a famous disease caused by one of these? Probably the only one you've ever heard of. Maybe ALS. I'm not sure about ALS.
Mad cows.
Mad cow disease. And here's the scary stuff about mad cow disease.
You never know
I mean,
what's gonna happen.
Well, you get it from eating beef. But even if you cook the beef, it doesn't kill it. Because it's not really alive to begin with. And it doesn't, it's sort of denaturation proof. And it may be 10 years after you ate the meat before the symptoms show up.
Yeah, when I said that, he was
Oh wow, so he can't donate blood or anything like that anymore. The Red Cross is really careful with it.
yeah, because he was in the Air Force and so
So,
and he couldn't leave like forever.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's been 15 or 20 years ago, there was a big outbreak of this in Great Britain. And if you were there within a certain number of years from when that happened, the Red Cross won't take your blood.
Yeah,
You
that's
can't
what
get
I
an
was
organ
thinking.
transplant.
Because my mom's dad lives at home. in the military and she went to Germany and she told me to give blood.
So it was mad cow.
Yeah.
It probably was.
I can't remember.
And, there's some people that think these things may be related to like Alzheimer's disease because the symptoms of mad cow are like Alzheimer's on steroids essentially. It happens a lot faster. Essentially, you eat your brain, die very quickly. Scary stuff though. But as far as we know, have there been cases in the United States?
No.
Yes. Very few. And they're not really sure where those people who got those cases got them from.
Probably England.
There are similar diseases in deer. There are similar diseases in sheep. There are similar diseases in rabbits, cows. We're not sure where it got started, where it came from. But you're most at risk if you eat what? What part of the animal? The brain or big nerves. Like if you're eating meat from right around the spinal cord or something like that, you're more likely to get it. Even if you were to eat meat from an infected cow, the odds are you're probably not going to get it unless you ate some nervous tissue, because that's where it tends to concentrate itself. There was a group in Africa until recently who kept getting this disease called kuru, which was essentially very similar to mad cow disease. How were they getting it? Yeah, they were cannibals. And they were eating the brain. The biggest insult they could give to their enemy was to kill them and eat their brain.
Oh, lovely.
And that's what they were doing. And this was going on 10 years ago, maybe. And eventually a group of researchers, because that seems like a dangerous job, right? A group of European researchers going into the heart of Africa to a bunch of cannibals and telling them don't eat brains. Sounds kind of dangerous, but they did. And apparently they eventually convinced these people that they were killing themselves by eating their enemy's brains. And I don't think it's going on much anymore. Strange things. Yeah.
What takes, I don't know if you know, like, what takes the symptoms so complex?
They don't really know. It's kind of like HIV. Maybe 10 years after you've been exposed before you get symptoms, and they still don't really understand why. One other thing I'll mention about viruses. Some kinds of viruses, like the flu virus, have this envelope around them that's sort of like what? What part of the cell is that sort of like? Sort of like, well, not all cells have a wall. It's sort of like a membrane. And because some viruses are that way, there are some people that want to say maybe they were the first things, and that life came from them.
Came from virus.
Yeah, that's the theory some people want to have. Hard to say. Most of them don't have this envelope around them, but there are a few, like the flu virus, that does have this almost membrane-like envelope on the outside. All right, a couple terms to be aware of. What's a pathogen? Any disease-causing organism. Now, in humans, obvious pathogens are bacteria and viruses. Bacteria get a bad name, but are most bacteria dangerous? Most of them are good, right? They, when you eat yogurt, you're eating millions of bacteria. They're good for you. But, in nature, what's probably the main role of bacteria? Yeah, decomposition. They do nitrogen fixation. They do all kinds of good stuff. Most of them are not dangerous. There are a few that are. Anything that can cause disease is a pathogen. So we got the bacteria, we got the viruses. What else could be considered human pathogens? What's something else that can make you sick? Yeah, there's certain fungi, like the ones that cause athlete's foot. Yeast infections. We could go on. There's a bunch of human fungal diseases. Took a whole class in college, medical mycology, which is fungal diseases. And there's some bad, nasty fungal diseases out there, by the way. It was kind of cool, actually. What else? Yeah, well, we got bacteria, viruses, fungi. What else?
Cave animals.
Okay, what? How about worms? Lots of worm diseases, right? Tapeworms, hookworms, pinworms. Well, ringworm is not a worm. Ringworm is a fungus. It just looks like a worm in the skin. Komodo dragon disease. Yeah, no, I'm not so sure about that.
I mean, like, they bite you and then,
But that's actually the bacteria in the mouth that causes the problem.
yeah, but you still have to get
Does
bit
it
by
turn
one.
into Godzilla?
One more that I will throw at you. Protist. You guys heard of this brain-eating amoeba that people have been catching lately?
Yeah.
That's protist.
So are the little bacteria you get under your contacts protists too, or like the
Um,
ones that eat out your eye?
I would imagine that would be a bacterial infection instead of a protist.
Oh, if you wear contacts for too long, you get bacteria caught in your eye that'll eat out your cornea.
Clean them well, yes, and change them out. Couple other terms you
Have contacts.
should have picked up in the hot zone. An epidemic. What's that word mean? Yeah, it's an outbreak of a disease, but in a localized area. Right, a local outbreak of a disease. So there might be a flu epidemic in Alabama. On the other hand, what's a pandemic?
That's like worldwide.
That's a worldwide outbreak. So like the HIV pandemic. Hopefully it won't be the Ebola pandemic, right? Hopefully it'll be the Ebola epidemic. That's what we're hoping for.
Do you think that Ebola
I don't think so, but there's always that possibility. We hope it's not.
Never heard.
In the hot zone, there was this room where they kept monkeys, and they were in separate cages, like all the way across the room. But apparently they traveled through the air, through water droplets in the air or something.
Right. Well, now, you know that the one, if you finish reading the whole book?
No.
There is an airborne version of Ebola. But it's called Ebola restin, which you'll get to eventually. Well, I'm not going to give the book away. I'm not going to give the whole book
I
away.
started reading about the resting monkeys. I think that's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not going to give that away yet. Finish reading it before I
I'm
tell
gonna
you
start
about
the
that.
book football breaks. Like, I'm gonna do it all that week.
That's good. It's a fast read.
By the way, it's
You know,
one
fun
of those
things.
things most of us have actually read. We don't have to do it.
I think a lot of you have.
Don't wait.
All right. That's all I'm going to say about viruses for right now. And actually, since I'm finished with viruses, that's probably a good place to stop.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
This is what makes sense.
Thank you.